This NATO new announcement about meeting the 2% target, it's really very unexpected.
The current administration is looking to change that drastically. That is a good part to move forward with Canada.
Close to 1.38, 1.37 is what Canada was spending, the percentage of the GDP on the defense. Now, all of a sudden, it's going to meet its 2% target. Could be Russia, could be China, could be some other countries as well. What if they do decide to come against Canada? How will Canada defend its sovereignty?
Spending into the national defense is actually directing Canada into the right direction rather than being reliant on any other nation.
80% of all the exports from Canada is going to US. Canada is heavily dependent on US. The steps that Prime Minister Mark Carney right now is taking, these are some things that could have easily been done under Trudeau's government as well. The only reason you would resign is that you yourself know is that you have made mistakes. The tariffs apparently from US has been raised from the previous 25% to now 50%.
Canada, in response, has imposed counter tariffs on $90 billion worth of US imports.
The GDP needs to be increased. Canada, about 7 or 8 years ago, was much better than the Canada that we have today. Hello folks, today we are going to be discussing on a range of topics in today's podcast. We'll be discussing on the most recent announcement, which was today, June the 9th, 2025, about Mark Carney announcing that he will be apparently meeting the NATO's 2% target by the March 2026 fiscal year. We'll be discussing about what really happened on the June 2nd First Ministers meeting between Mark Carney and the premiers in Canada, and what was Mark Carney's nation building projects. Then we'll be covering some other topics from the new and increased steel and aluminum tariffs from US into Canada, and what are some really key issues between British Columbia and Alberta, and why is British Columbia not liking some of the moves that Alberta is playing right now. Let's get into this podcast, and if you get any value, make sure you like and you subscribe. Okay, Sunny, I think you must be aware about what really happened in today's most recent announcement by Mark Carney. Apparently, we are going to be making some huge changes. Apparently, Canada is going to be doing something that no other prime minister in the past took an initiative of, even though, and here's the craziest part, even though they had the option to. Imagine this. What would have happened if Justin Trudeau had never resigned and was still the Prime Minister? Do you think this NATO target would have been met? I think this huge change was required, and to be very honest with you and frankly, I don't really think Mark Carney is all that liberal. I think the Liberal Party itself was taken far too left under Trudeau's regime, and under Mark Carney, I think we are coming more towards center left. In my opinion, I can be wrong on this, but that's my opinion. And this NATO new announcement about meeting the 2% target, it's really very unexpected and nobody was expecting. And I believe we were still going under the same previous narrative that this NATO target would not have been met until, what was it, 2030 or 2032? What are some of your thoughts, Sunny?
Yeah, likewise, the NATO target was, I don't think so, this was in a discussion since last year. The previous government was looking somewhere close to 2032, and the current administration is looking to change that drastically. I think the major push for that change comes from the talks from Americas, where Trump was in the viewpoint of annexing Canada, and also the viewpoint from various discussions that we had over sovereignty of the Arctic waterways, and trying to assert Canada's sovereignty over his area. And I think this might have been something that either government, whatever comes in place, would have been targeting naturally towards making sure that Canada is self-sustained and is also having the equipment, whether it being military equipment or infrastructure, or the military personals on spot. So I think that is a good part to move forward with Canada.
1.4%. 1.4%, or actually, you know what, not exactly 1.4, a little bit less than 1.4, close to 1.38, 1.37 is what Canada was spending, the percentage of the GDP on the defense. And now all of a sudden it's going to meet its 2% target. The most curious thing, all of a sudden, where is the money coming from? All of a sudden, where is this money coming from? So apparently Canada was spending roughly between 31 and 33 billion dollars annually over the defense, and this year they are going to spend additional 9 billion dollars on the defense to meet the 2% NATO target. Now here's a question: how much exactly did Justin Trudeau spend on the CERB and CEBA payments during the COVID? Now I understand that was necessary. People were undergoing a massive change, and people were really unaware during that chaos what's really going to happen with the economy. And I do understand if a government wants to come out and make a decision that they want to spend some money on the CERB payments for people and for the small businesses. But then they also came out with the announcement that they are going to spend more money for the child daycare subsidy, where they are going to have parents only pay $10 a day for the daycare. Now, if they have money for those kind of programs, if they have money for all the environmental steps that they are taking to protect the environment, they're spending more money to stop the building of pipelines. For example, the Keystone XL pipeline, why it was abandoned in 2021. After the permit was denied by Biden's government, there was no pushback by Justin Trudeau. And apparently, Mark Carney is coming out with just spending $9 billion more, we can meet the NATO target. And the more curious thing is, this announcement is just coming a week before Mark Carney is due to meet other leaders of the world next week in the G7 summit. By the way, stay tuned. We are going to be covering a podcast on that as well. Another thing on top of that, Sunny, to keep in mind is that Mark Carney somewhat is also under the pressure that there is a meeting going to be later this month, in the month of June, in The Hague in Netherlands, where the NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte is going to be holding a summit where he wants to propose new changes and wants to conduct voting on the proposed changes, where they want to increase the new spending targets on defense, which would be 5% from the 2% original target. I think this is far overdue. I think this should have been done under Trudeau's government. Why they never did it, besides the fact that they were pressed millions and hundreds of times by the opposition, why they could not defend and never able to provide a solid answer. What would happen? Right now we see all those steps being taken by US against their enemies. Could be Russia, could be China, could be some other countries as well. Now, what if those countries were to come against or launch any cyber attacks? Because remember, the World War III is not going to be a World War IV, it's not going to be an actual war, it's going to be a cyber or space war. And what if they do decide to come against Canada because of some of Canada's policies or some of the political steps that Canada does take? How will Canada defend its sovereignty? I mean, just look at the fact about the trade. 80% of all the exports from Canada is going to US. Canada is heavily dependent on US. When you're talking about defense, it is Mark Carney's own statement that 75 cents on the dollar that they spend on defense is going to the US, so that they can help us. They can help Canada out in time of need. Justin Trudeau was solely sitting on the premise that US would be there to help him until US stopped. What kind of strategy is that for a leader of a second largest country? What are your views, Sunny?
Yeah, simply Canada has to take its own stand. Reliance on America as their neighboring, as their allied nation has been the trust factor where this long-term relation has fruitful and made various growth in the economy sectors, whether it being supply chain integration or the auto sector being heavily integrated in terms of production of the cars across the nations between America, Mexico, and Canada. However, this has come to a halt right now with the current movement of the America. And with that being said, Canada has to look for alternate measures, whether it being a rearms act for Europe to get started with the nation building process in terms of military defense from Europe's side, or it could be another set of set of some adjoining deals done by maybe Australia or Germany or any other country that are trying to benefit from each other. Canada is also looking out for any or all the nations that are looking to participate in that type of collaborations, and I see that the reliance on America will still be there, but actively government is trying to mitigate that.
Well, listen, the whole point of NATO is that the member countries will be there to protect each other. Do you want to hear an interesting statement, Sunny? Check this out. And this is a statement, by the way, made by Carney the same day he made the announcement for meeting the NATO's 2% target. This is what he said. Canada's military simply doesn't have the resources it needs. Only one of our 4 submarines is seaworthy, less than half of our marine fleet, and land vehicles are operational, and broadly we are too reliant on the United States. Did you get that? Yeah. Only one of the 4 submarines are worthy and operational at this moment. For context, United States as of 2025 has operational over 70 submarines, while Canada has only 4. And out of the 4, Carney, this is own Carney's statement that only 1 is worthy and operational at this moment. And this makes the statement even more truer that yes, 75 cents on every single dollar that Canada is currently spending on defense is actually going to the US. That means US still holds the upper hand. If tomorrow US comes out and says, just like Donald Trump did a few months ago, that they are not going to be helping out Canada with defense anymore
until they join into the
until they join the Golden Dome missile system or given the tariffs, they will not provide the defense capabilities that they have been doing in the past, and this is going to be a huge setback. I mean, the steps that Prime Minister Mark Carney right now is taking to join the rearm program from Europe when the King arrived here in Canada, or the radar systems that he's trying to get manufactured by Australia for Canada's needs in the Arctic region, and then again now meeting a 2% target. These are some things that could have easily been done or at least sourced or managed under Trudeau's government as well. I don't have personally anything against Trudeau. The whole point the guy did is resign from his post. And when you resign from a post, here's the thing. If you are in a position, whether it's public or private, Sunny, either you quit, you resign, or you get fired. If you quit, there could be a numerous reason why you quit. If you resign, there's a numerous reason why you are resigning. If you're quitting, you are just giving up. There's too much pressure for you in the company or in the position that you have. If you're getting fired, you're making too many mistakes, and the management does not like what you do and how you conduct yourself. Resign. The only reason you would resign is that you yourself know is that you have made mistakes. And in this case, I believe Justin Trudeau made a lot of mistakes. There's so many leaders in so many democratic nations out there who usually claim the facts that in 4 years they're not able to usually make a lot of change. They're not about to bring a lot of change in just 4 years of their term. But in this case, Justin Trudeau had more than 6-7 years, more than 8-9 years. And what does he really have to prove? What did he really bring? What was the one thing that, I mean, do you right now, you have been living in Canada for almost 10-11 years now, Sunny. Do you feel that you are more richer than you were before? I feel I am not more richer than before. I don't think the economy is doing much well than before. I think the economy was doing much better in the past than it is doing right now. But before we move on, any thoughts?
I think spending into the national defense is actually directing Canada into the right direction, rather than being reliant on any other nation. Even if it's America right now, it could be some other nation. But in general, diversification is the key for any economy to be working good. And let's move on to the next topic.
Mark Carney and his nation building project with the premiers, that he had a meeting on the June 2nd. This is a meeting that Mark Carney has been waiting for. This meeting was hosted by Scott Moe in Saskatoon, which is capital of Saskatchewan. And in this meeting, there was a lot of issues that were being discussed, and according to some spokespeople from that meeting, they said most of the issues will never be publicized, just because they only want to shortlist the issues that will actually make the shortlist, that will actually be on the agenda that they want to change. But here are some things. During the meeting, Mark Carney proposed new legislation that he wants he wants trade and business through provinces to occur in a unison, and he wanted to propose a new legislation called One Canadian Economy. Now, one problematic thing that I find in Canada is that you have 13 provinces, and each province has its own different regulations, set of rules, and set of laws. The premiers have their own ideology and they have their own political bias. By saying that, there are also differences on how they conduct trade between one province to another province. I mean, now you have seen some headlines in the news that provinces are banding together and they are signing memorandums of understanding (MOUs) on freeing up some of the terms and conditions when it comes to internal trade, and making it more barrier free. This, I think, should have been done. I mean, when we were amid the tariff situation, before Justin Trudeau had resigned from Donald Trump in March or April 2025. It was then when Chrystia Freeland and Justin Trudeau, I remember, they were coming out and making some huge statements that they want to bring some changes around the internal trade between the provinces. Carney, during this meeting, proposed new legislation during this meeting, and he wants trade and business to occur between the provinces in a unison. And he called his new proposed legislation a One Canadian Economy. And apparently, in this new legislation, he wants the trade and the business to occur between all the provinces without any barriers, for the flow of goods to occur completely barrier free. I mean, check this out, Sunny. During March and April 2025, when Donald Trump had announced tariffs on Canada, it was Chrystia Freeland, then Deputy Prime Minister, and Justin Trudeau who came out and wanted to propose some changes to internal trade, but could not make all the necessary changes that should have been made. And right now, why is it that the premiers themselves are coming out and making this bold move of making this internal trade barrier free, when this should have been done even before the tariffs, even much before Donald Trump's presidency? From the very beginning, why were these barriers never taken down? Because of these barriers, it is a small business who has to spend 10 times more. I mean, just take an example of liquor. One province who's manufacturing liquor, when they have to sell liquor to another province, they have to comply with the whole set of rules and regulations. They have to pay for completely different duties when it comes to transportation, when it comes to trucking. They have to follow completely different weighing regulations, and how the permits are issued for these trucks to go from one province to another. I mean, there is no doubt why these provinces and why these businesses in those provinces are claiming the fact that it is much easier to sell in US rather than selling in one province to another province in Canada. Your thoughts, Sunny?
Even while King Charles III was opening his throne speech in the Parliament, while opening the Parliament, he kind of mentioned on the same lines that these internal trade barriers cause the economy somewhere close to $52 or $200 billion a year. It's a huge sum. Looking at all the factors involving these tariff talks, this looks like a reasonable thing to do right now. And building a one Canadian economy, building all these 13 provinces into one unison fashion looks like the reasonable way to go. Few things that have created a hurdle in the way are, like, trades like plumbers, electricians, or land surveyor, anything along those lines, even nurses, doctors, lawyers. Some of these trades, when you go from a province to another province, even though the certifications you have, they still need to recertify. It could not be as a whole degree or something, but there's still a year or 2 years or maybe 6 months in some cases, maybe nothing in some cases as well. But essentially these create an obstacle for a tradesman to or tradewoman to work from one province to another province. So, for an example, say you have jobs for electricians in Nova Scotia, right? And in Ontario, all the jobs are full, and you have electricians waiting or just looking around, and unemployment being on the rise. In that particular case, you can have electricians go to a high-paying job in Nova Scotia and boost the GDP of the economy of the Canada, while this is not the case. This has created hurdles in these ways. Same goes for businesses as well. Say, for example, you as a winery manufacturer, right? You create wine and you're trying to sell it in from BC to Alberta, or say from Ontario to Quebec. Their laws are different. You need to repackage it, you need to relabel it according to their own provincial laws before you even sell it. So these are the things that are making it harder for the businesses or harder for the tradespeople to work around and have a fair share of the whole economy of Canada. Implementing these things can be seen into growing the economy. Some of the few surveys that we saw could be, for example, right now we see Nova Scotia. I think it's Nova Scotia that is trying to implement all trades from all the provinces, in which you will naturally attract the cream of trades, or you will attract the talent from all the provinces, disregarding the fact of what certificates of which province you have. So say you have a Ontario certifications, you have a Alberta certification. Both of these provinces, both of these workers in these provinces are allowed to work in Nova Scotia, just having by a certificate being checked by a province, being regulated, being stamped on by a province. So we see a lot of provinces now coming up, even with Doug Ford's recent updates as well. A lot of provinces like Nova Scotia is coming up as well to make trade agreements with and signing up, as you said, MOUs with Ontario, and same is being done with Western provinces as well. All of those 4 provinces are being having an agreements in place already. Now this has improved and is going to improve further. This started off in 2017 when they had the agreement in place, which was a Canadian Free Trade Agreement, and now it is being directed into a much further, much better way. And I think that is where we head right now.
Now, this is, don't you agree with me that this thing which is being done right now should have been done almost 10-15 years ago? But again, why hasn't this been done? Like, only God knows. What really did the Liberal government was doing under Justin Trudeau, I have little no idea. But anyways, moving on. Now, this one Canadian economy that was proposed by Mark Carney on this June 2nd First Ministers meeting, this is what they were really proposing in this meeting. So let's say there is a development project. A development project could be anything from environmental to building a pipeline to building a dam to building a turbine that easily flows more energy or oil or natural gas between the provinces, that increases the trade domestically or help the country export more towards through the British Columbia or Nova Scotia or Montreal ports to Asian markets. Now, the proposed legislation outlines, but remember this, it does not define, it just outlines at this moment how projects will be chosen for fast tracking, including considerations like Canada's climate objectives and the interests of the indigenous peoples. Now, according to the proposed legislation also, once a project is selected, and by the way, they want the projects to be selected by the new projects office that they want to create. Now, once a project is selected, a project would receive conditional approval under federal regulations. Now, one important thing to remember here. Now, they say that under the proposed legislation, if a project will receive conditional approval. Currently, if you're trying to build a project, be it a mine, be it a pipeline, be it any other environmental development project, if you receive any conditional approval, it does not mean you can start construction or you can start hiring labor to start building the project. It just means that you have a temporary green light, and now you still have to go through the provincial review boards. You still have to conduct meetings with the indigenous communities, and you still have to comply with all other provincial or federal regulations before you can actually get a green light to start construction. But under this proposed regulations, a conditional approval does not mean you still have to go through the provincial compliance review boards and meetings with indigenous communities. No. Under this proposed legislation, apparently, once you receive a conditional approval, you can start building and constructing right away. And the law says the process will then include authorizations based on applicable laws such as the Fisheries Act, the Canadian Environmental Protection Act, the Species at Risk Act, and the Impact Assessment Act. Now, Carney says, now this is what Mark Carney said during that meeting. Mark Carney says 5 factors will be taken into account in considering whether a project is in the national interest. Now again, this is going to be the new, through the new projects office that he wants to create under the new proposed legislation, which was the One Canadian Economy. The 5 factors that will be taken account in considering whether a project is in the national interest. 1, its ability to strengthen Canada's autonomy. Its resilience and security provide economy benefits to Canada. The project has to provide resilience and security, economy benefits to Canada. The project has to advance the interest of Indigenous peoples. The project must contribute to clean growth and have a high likelihood of successful execution. These are some things that he wants the factors to be taken into account for the major project office that he wants to build under the new legislation while choosing a project that they want to give a conditional approval to. Now, regarding labor mobility that you were just talking about for the tradespeople from one province to another, this is what he had to say during the First Minister's meeting. The bill would eliminate federal barriers by making it easier for workers to get a federal license by recognizing provincial or territorial work authorizations for the same job. Federal officials gave the example of a land surveyor in Ontario who would want to work on a federal project but would not need additional certifications in another province to do so. So if a land surveyor is working in Ontario, under the current rules and regulations, he would need another province's license or certifications to conduct the same job there as well. But under the proposed bill, the One Canadian Economy, he would not. He would just have to have, like you said, Sunny, before, he would have to have the same certifications that he has in Ontario, which he will be able to use in another province as well. To this, the Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre, who is no longer an MP, had to say that he is actually supportive of this bill. Isn't that curious a little bit? Because how many times have you seen conservatives come out and say that they were supportive of any bill or any legislation that Trudeau had ever proposed in the parliament? This is something rare. This is a moment that you all want to keep in a logbox. Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre said while the bill does not go far enough to address barriers to interprovincial trade, his party is open to collaborating with the government by proposing amendments to the bill to even build more projects across the country. A lot of interesting things are going to happen very soon. And again, just like you were saying before, other premiers from provinces during that meeting, they were also giving green light to the new legislation that was being proposed by Mark Carney. But again, what Mark Carney did on June 2nd during the First Minister's meeting had already been done by most of the premiers, by most of the provinces, when they signed the Memorandum of Understandings to flow goods, to have the trade and businesses occur between the provinces barrier-free. Any thoughts, Sunny, before we move on to the next topic?
This will actually give like a formal understanding to all the provinces that this is where the nation is headed, and it will just make things easier for all the provinces to work around with anything that they have as well. I think the meeting went well as well, from what reviews we've been getting from other premiers as well, from their open public dialogues. that this was a positive meeting. The outlook looked really promising for all the provinces. All the provinces shared their ideologies, their projects that they're looking to implement, and everything was taken in by the federal government, and they will be reviewing it, of course. And hopefully we'll come to know soon which projects are moving forward and what could the Canadian economy be looking at.
Moving on, new and increased tariffs on steel and aluminum in Canada. Well, not just in Canada, he increased the tariffs for all the countries, but Canada is one of the countries that had been hit hardest. The tariffs apparently from US has been raised from the previous 25% to now 50%. Guess what, Sunny? The new car that we were looking to buy is going to be even more expensive now. Trump signed an executive order on June the 3rd to double steel and aluminum tariffs. These tariffs increase duties from the previous 25% to now 50%. What do you think, Sunny?
This is again a big change for Canadian economy, which is heavily reliant on US as well. There is a major outsourcing of even Ontario, the steel being around $30 billion of a trade with the US right now. So this is only a part where Canada as a nation is already looking into moving away from America, but still they're getting a lot of tariffs being imposed after month over month. So this is a big dip on the GDP that we might see, hoping it's not too bad. Canada in response has imposed counter tariffs on $90 billion worth of US imports. Mark Carney's statement has been that he and his government will take his time to evaluate the situation and act accordingly. Canada's trade deficit in April widened to an all-time high of whopping $7.1 billion as tariff imposed by US President Donald Trump sucked out demand for Canadian goods from the United States. That means Canada as a nation has been buying more goods from US than it has been selling. This trade deficit was the reason why tariffs got imposed by Trump from America to all the other countries, because America was seeing its trade deficit to close to around $1 trillion. And recently Canada has been growing that trade deficit right now. So I know from all the provinces they are trying to push this narrative where they're trying to get all this Canadian made steel, aluminium being used inside Canada as much as possible. However, the big surplus, the big volume that Canada is already doing was through America. So it's still going to take some time, but the adjustments and the policies, the regulations, the premiers pushing through it will naturally stabilize the economy in some time.
Now, here's the thing. $7.1 billion is what they're claiming that they have sucked out of the Canadian economy and have caused the Canadian economy to go into a deficit with trade with the US. Canada had a $16 billion of surplus that the Canadian Parliamentary Budgetary Officer himself claimed that Canada had by the end of the 2024. I don't remember which YouTube channel, but this was said in another YouTube channel that I was listening to about these tariffs. It's not that the steel and aluminum tariffs that are being imposed by Donald Trump onto Canada are completely illegal or should not be there at all. I do agree with the Canadian businesses that these tariffs are really hurting both sides, the businesses on both sides in Canada and in the US as well. But here's the thing, when you have a surplus against a country, you need to give another country a chance as well to gain a surplus. But if you are a country that has been getting surplus all the times, other country, they are not benefiting out of the trade. Plus the NAFTA agreement or the new CUSMA agreement that we have, it is going to be putting salt on the wound. Now, again, I think this is Donald Trump coming out and saying this is our time to actually gain a surplus over Canada, but there is no telling right now, and I don't think there is an economist out there who can actually predict if Donald Trump is going to end this tariff soon, or if these tariffs are going to last the whole term, which is for 4 years. I mean, in 2018, when he imposed tariffs, they lasted for almost 10.5 months. So there is no telling right now. Again, how are these tariffs, if we see in micro examples, how are these tariffs hurting the businesses in Canada? Uh, Now, if you take an example of a business, of a tool and die company, or of a company that is building small steel and aluminum products, they have to make these products using some raw material, raw steel and raw aluminum. Under the CUSMA agreement, if Canada is exporting steel and aluminum to US, they also have to buy back some of the steel and aluminum from US suppliers into Canada. And when when Canadian businesses, they are trying to buy raw material from US, they are able to sell the goods at a cheaper rate in Canada. Why? Because if Canadian businesses were to buy the same raw material, the same raw steel and raw aluminum from Montreal aluminum mills or steel mills, for example, in Hamilton, Ontario, or other provinces, and they were to add on the extra cost of trucking just between the provinces, including the internal provinces trade barriers, the same manufactured product, the same manufactured good is going to cost two or maybe even three times more. This is why the Canadian businesses, especially in the liquor industry or in the steel manufacturing industry, usually come out and they say that buying raw material and steel, it's easier to do business with US than to do business within Canada. And with the new high tariffs, these businesses, they have to again strategize or re-strategize their business plan, and they have to re-evaluate how they are going to manufacture these goods in able to survive in the market. I mean, just take this example. Catherine Cobden, President and CEO of the Canadian Steel Producers Association, said the 50% tariffs will essentially close the US markets to the Canada's domestic industry for half of its production. Again, we are going to see a similar situation what happened with General Motors, where they almost halved the labor force that they had working in their factories, or other businesses who began laying off the moment tariffs were announced. Even a 10% tariff on the food or on the auto industry in Canada, it's going to hurt on a very huge scale. And we already know almost 55-60% of Canadians are already living paycheck to paycheck. And when you add on almost 80% of mortgages that people have on their houses, when they have so much expenses, when the food is at a all-time high, people would rather eat their food from food banks than actually buy from high-end groceries, for example, Loblaws or other stores. 100% people are going to suffer the greatest in these situations. Any thoughts you want to put in, Sunny?
There's another example that we have over here, which is Pacific Bolt Manufacturing, a bolt and fastener company in Langley, British Columbia, previously imported raw steel from US states like California and Ohio. However, due to 50% tariff imposed by US on steels and aluminum, the company has shifted its purchasing to Quebec. This pivot has significantly increased transportation costs, as trucking heavily materials across Canada is expensive. Now, we have the longest undefended border across two nations. You would think that trading among the provinces would be cheaper, right? But no, it's not. Trading between the Canada provinces and some US states is much cheaper, just because of the distance it need to travel from the manufacturing plant to the production plant and then to the suppliers and stuff. So these transportation costs are adding up as the tariffs are increasing, and how the company will try to absorb as much as they can, but at some point they will distribute these costs over to the consumer, whether it being in cars or whether it being in housing cost or any other shape or form.
Let's move on to the next topic, Sunny. Let's talk about what are some key issues between or ongoing issues right now which are going between British Columbia and Alberta. Now, these are not issues which are going really publicly and they are fighting publicly on news media with each other, but these are some infighting going on with between the premiers of both the provinces. Um, here's a small takeaway. During the same June 2nd First Minister's meeting, Premier Danielle Smith of Alberta proposed a pipeline, a bitumen pipeline that she wants to build from Edmonton to Prince Rupert Port in British Columbia. However, the deputy premier, who I believe it's a lady, Nikki Sharma of deputy premier of British Columbia said that they did not had any proponent to this proposal and they want shovel ready projects, which means that they don't want to build this pipeline at this moment. Well, also it's a fair argument that they don't have any proponent to this proposal, which means that they really don't have a lot of investors in real time backing this pipeline from Edmonton to the Prince Rupert Port in British Columbia. But again, right now, in order to increase the GDP of Canada, if they cannot do it with trade with the US, they have to increase the domestic trade. And how do you increase the domestic trade? By increasing the number of pipelines, which would also mean maybe reviving the Keystone XL pipeline or to expand the Enbridge Line 3 and 5 pipelines, in addition to the already expanded Trans Mountain pipeline, the TMX pipeline. Now, here are some things. I have been trying to see a few things or try to research a few things if there was some sort of a political connection between Justin Trudeau and David Eby. Now, in a short time, I wasn't really able to find anything, but I was really curious. Why would British Columbia not be in favor of building a lot of pipelines, or why would British Columbia be in support of Bill C-69 tanker ban? Do you know what tanker ban really is, Sunny? So when you are shipping and exporting oil, it has to go through these oil tankers. It has to be exported through these oil tankers. And while British Columbia's Premier David Eby is afraid of any oil spills or any environmental impacts that it may cause, he does not want more pipelines to be built. He does not want more oil to be exported from Canada to other Canadian trade partners, to Asian markets. He does not want more pipelines to be built within Canada as well. However, he would support Mark Carney in some of his proposed legislations. But when it comes to Alberta's Danielle Smith proposing some changes, he wants to support Bill C-69. Doesn't really help a lot of stuff. Now, BC's major revenue again is also coming from the same ports where they are exporting these oils from. For example, the port of Vancouver, which is the largest port in British Columbia, or the port of Prince Rupert, or the port of Stewart. These are some of the ports which are being used right now to export the oil, gas, and energy from Canada to another Canadian trade partners and allies. And again, when it comes to building pipelines, I think this is really something that Premier David Eby should actually come on the same boat as Premier Danielle Smith and think about constructing from Edmonton through Prince Rupert Port, so that we can increase the amount of oil barrels that we are exporting a day. I mean, just by increasing the quantity of TMX pipeline from under Kinder Morgan to when Trudeau took over and expanded the pipeline from 300 barrels per day to almost tripling the amount, roughly 890 barrels per day, gave Canada such an economic boost and made such a strong ally to United States that other premiers are also supporting constructing new pipelines within Canada, or new pipelines from Alberta or Saskatchewan to British Columbia right now at this moment, to boost the national economy, to boost the national GDP. Right now, if you see, and like we talked about this in the previous podcast, Sunny, as well, Canada's the whole GDP of country of Canada is less than the GDP of the whole country of Canada right now is less than just one or two states in the United States. There is literally no internal trade happening. There is no domestic market capturing happening right now in Canada, which needs to occur, whether be it pipelines or whether be it taking down all the barriers among the provinces. What are some of your thoughts, Sunny?
On one side, we have David Abbey that is actively looking to protect environment and supports the tanker ban as well. Um, on the other hand, we have a push from Daniel Smith trying to open up more routes for pipelines and trying to export as much as possible. In the middle, we have Mark Carney, who is trying to mitigate this situation in a way that way he keeps both the provinces happy and trying to improve the economy. We do see some of the things that have been brought up by the new government are like decarbonization policies. This decarbonization on around 10 or 15 sites will be considering a good amount of investment, say around 10-20 billion dollars. This would be somewhere in terms of their carbon policies, and will if that is being implemented and they are trying to improve on the pipelines, will David Abbey go through with the pipeline? Will it not occur? That is going to be an interesting question in the coming terms. Um,
I think
we
here's the thing. Here's the thing. Alberta is also coming out with the new separatist movement. If you see, Sunny, they are also 19% of the people living right now. 19% of the voters in the province of Alberta right now, according to the Angus Reid poll right now, they're saying they want to separate. They want to separate from Canada. Uh, this is the most complex part about this. I don't think Alberta and British Columbia are going to have too many differences in the future, because Alberta needs British Columbia more than British Columbia needs Alberta. Did you know what I just said?
yeah.
Alberta needs British Columbia more than British Columbia needs Alberta. Why? Because right now there is only one pipeline that is transporting, that is exporting the majority of barrels per day from Edmonton to other Canadian trade partners, which is the TMX pipeline. And if we were to have any differences occur between the two provinces, it is Alberta who's going to suffer the most. Because if, let's say, they have some differences and Premier Abbey restricts access to to the province's ports, Alberta can no longer use the TMX pipeline. They would have to resort to either the Enbridge line 3 and 5, which are not as expensive, to export the oil, or they have to ship the oil to refineries, because there are not a lot of refineries again in Alberta. They have to ship the oil to refineries in Ontario and Montreal, and then ship it again to either the ports through Montreal or in New Brunswick to Asian markets, which is going to be even more expensive. Or they will have to use railway lines to export the oil. And again, what is the best railway line to use to export? It is through the Stewart port that goes through the British Columbia to export oil to the U.S. if Alberta wants to do that. So, despite the fact that they will have currency issues if they do go through the separatist movement, or they will have the issues between their own province on how the business trade will occur, and how the overall economy will take shape, they are going to have a lot of differences with other provinces, and how they export and import goods as well. And this is what Daniel Smith has to say when it comes to exporting oil. Canada supplies around 60% of all US oil imports, and the oil province of Alberta alone supplies 56% of all US oil imports, twice as much as Mexico, Saudi Arabia, and Iraq combined. And to be honest, when you compare it to the separatist movement, I agree that the oil that Canada exports is compatible to what these countries need. Uh, but again, you will not be able to export. I mean, what other country has the same amount of oil, compatible crude oil that Canada exports? it would be Iraq, it would be Saudi Arabia, and then other country would be Venezuela, which right now is under sanctions from the United States, where Donald Trump said that any country who would be trading with Venezuela is going to have double the amount of tariffs. Any thoughts, Sunny?
Let's look at that pipeline, the TMX pipeline. This pipeline tripled the capacity of original pipeline to 890,000 barrels per day from 300,000 barrels per day to carry crude from Alberta's oil sands to British Columbia. And that is the one pipeline. Imagine how much more can this turn into if all the other projects that are being proposed could be implemented. I understand BC's approach to the environment friendly aspect and their tanker bans support as well. Looking at this from a perspective of federal government, looks like the meeting was conductive and was taken as a positive approach from all the provinces, whether it being BC or Alberta, and in favor of building this one Canadian economy.
Listen, in order to increase the GDP of Canada right now, which Canada desperately needs to increase. Why? Not just because the businesses need to survive because of the tariffs, but also because of the housing market. That is not something that we covered in today's podcast, Sunny, but you have to check out other factors and other elements of the economy as well. The GDP needs to be increased. The purchasing power, the purchasing and buying power of the citizens in Canada needs to increase. It needs to be boosted again. When you talk about housing, there's a lot of people who are sitting on their houses and then they're not ready to sell at all because they're not able to buy another property at either the same price, or they're not able to sell the property at the price that they want to sell. People are eating their own equities. People are not able to get enough equities in their own property that they're selling. I mean, you buy a property right now for yourself to live in, and it feels more like a liability than an asset in this moment in Canada. Again, right now, the domestic trade needs to be boosted so that businesses, so that citizens again can have the breath of relief where they can spend more, where they can regain the power that Canada had before, but that Canada had about roughly 7-10 years ago. I mean, if I were to given a chance, I still think, in my opinion, that Canada about 7 or 8 years ago was much better than the Canada that we have today. But hopefully, let's see how Mark Carney is able to shape the new Canada with the new legislations or policies that he's coming out with. Nobody really knows. We have to wait and see what really happens on the G7 summit. If Canada is going to again meet the NATO target, if it is passed in the June Netherlands meeting, because Canada has long suffered to meet the 2% target, and when it wants to meet the 2% target, the Secretary General of NATO wants to increase the NATO target to 5%. I mean, only 10 countries out of the 32 countries are not able to meet the NATO target, and Canada is one of them. This is something we have to check it out, Sunny. The coming few weeks are going to be extremely interesting. What direction Canada will go into, everybody has their eye on it right now. Any thoughts you want to put in before we conclude?
No, let's see how things roll in the new weeks. And we have two main events coming up, G7 meeting and the NATO meeting. And we'll keep you guys posted. And
again, if you find any value in this podcast, make sure you like and you subscribe. Have a good evening, folks.